So I'm here with Brad Hargreaves, who is founder and editor of Thesis Driven. Before we jump into a conversation that'll probably meander across a whole bunch of topics, across tech and real estate and policy, what is Thesis Driven and what was the thesis behind it?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me on. Good to have this conversation. And just to start, Thesis Driven, I mean, it sounds very thesis driven, right? Well, we really started it because we believe there are needs across the spectrum in both real estate, or developers and owners, as well as technology companies to better understand what's going on in the built world. So 2 or 3 times a week, we publish these deep dives into the role either technology is having in the future of real estate, or the role that demographic changes, big macro forces are having on what will be the capital markets ideas, what will be the real estate themes that are winners in 5, 10, even 20 years we like to look out. So we're taking a much longer time horizon, a much wider view on what is going to influence where we live, how we work, and what types of real estate are going to make sense in the future. Because real estate is a long-term multi-generational business. It's not a day-to-day thing. And so we're covering that, and we'll also be rolling out some other products over the next 6 to 12 months that are a little bit more on the software and data side, serving both real estate technology entrepreneurs as well as real estate owners.
Interesting, and like the kind of what you're saying begs the question, which I feel like we got asked in the early days of fifthwall, which is, okay, it seems kind of obvious that real estate and tech are going to collide. And in so doing, they're going to create new asset classes. They're going to transform what it means to be in the real estate business. And our approach was, let's start a venture capital fund to invest in all of the technologies and emerging companies that are going to capitalize on that trend. But what I'm hearing you say is also there's a white space in the editorial and content landscape where no one's really covering that same secular collision. Why did no one else see that?
Well, I think a lot of people in the real estate industry tend to be very deal focused. I mean, what do people in real estate love to talk about? They love to talk about deals. They love to talk about cap rates. They love to talk about interest rates. And that's all really important and very critical to the day-to-day of someone who's developing real estate or buying real estate's lives. But when you think about what are the macro trends that influence as a real estate entrepreneur, what do I want to bet on? As an institutional investor, what gets me excited over the next 3 to 5 years? That's a very different set of factors that are going to influence that. I want to hear about macro changes in consumer preference. I want to hear about what some upstart GPs are doing on the fringes, doing $5, $10, $20 million deals that are not institutional scale today, but might be institutional scale in 3 to 5 years. So it's a very different way of looking at it. And we're kind of trying to combine a little bit of the policy macro angle of what you might have at like a ULI with the very tactical day-to-day of a real deal or biz now. So kind of fit somewhat in between there, but everything written by practitioners. So not your traditional real estate journalists, but people like myself who have entrepreneurial backgrounds, developers, et cetera, who come from the business so they understand the core terms and what matters. And my deepest fear writing a thesis-driven letter is, sometimes you read an article in the mainstream media, you read a New York Times article, don't want to pick on them. If you know the industry deeply well, if you know the sector, and you read a New York Times article about it, you look at it and you're like, wow, there's so many things wrong in this. There's so many oversimplifications. I never want someone to have that reaction to a thesis-driven letter.
One of the ways I think about what it means to be a real estate owner today and how it's changed is that, if you go back in time and think at the most essential level, real estate as a business is just about how humans commercialize and utilize three-dimensional space to create the economy and create society and create civilization. And so at the most basic level, the role of real estate owners is somewhat of actually being a sociologist or almost like an anthropologist about how humans are going to use three-dimensional space to create things. And somewhere in the last 50 years, it feels like the real estate industry dropped that imperative to be a sociologist. And now technology and climate change and changing consumer preference is thrusting that responsibility back on them. Is that a little bit of how you see Thesis Driven's positioning in the market, like thrusting the responsibility to be a sociologist back on real estate owners?
100% agree. I think interest rates in many ways, and the fact that it's so much more difficult to build and succeed as a developer today has also contributed to that. You can't just build the same thing everyone else is building in the same way. You can't just build commodity product the same way you've always done it and succeed in the same way people were able to over the past 20 years in a low interest rate environment. People have to be thesis driven. They have to say, hey, I believe that this category, this sector, this way of human behavior, sociology in your terms, that is going to be a huge factor going forward, and it's going to influence the success of this project. It's going to lead to those outside returns. So 100% agree. Real estate developers have to be sociologists. They kind of have to be scientists, or at least be able to follow the science in some ways when you're thinking about the macro changes that are to come.